here we are, everything's getting pretty much finished. I did want to show some of the hand sanding techniques I use towards the end of the process, but to be honest, the random orbital got it. I'm really happy with how everything turned out. I have like really nice, smooth, even contours. We're at a 800 grit finish right now, and you can see it's already really glossy. I will just pass this over the buffer a few times real lightly, and I'm going to use a white buffing wheel with white compound. And the reason for that is the yellow ones work really well on metal. I think those are linen and the white ones are cotton. I could be wrong, but the yellow ones cut really fast, but they do tend to stain anything that's not metal and porous, which wood would fall into that. The stabilizing resin does really help this process. There are certainly types of wood, like I feel like koa is a great example. It's beautiful wood and it's got a lot of chatterance, which is that iridescent effect, like a cat's eye stone or the fiberglass, where when you tilt it, it can capture the reflective qualities in the surface because it's broken up and there's different refractions going on. So woods with a lot of chatterance will tend to clog on a buffing wheel, and you'll lose all that reflectiveness and it'll just turn into a muddy mess. And that's all because of end grain orientation and pores getting clogged and blah 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 blah. We'll get into that in a much later. This is kind of my quick run through video. So I'm at 800 grit here. I went ahead and drilled my little maker's mark hole. Did that on the end, or with an end mill, and I used to do that at the beginning of the handle phase when it was flat, because it's very easy to drill a hole in something flat. It's much harder to drill something with a organic shape that's tapered and you're not quite sure what's level. But they're very thin little discs, so if I were to drill the hole beforehand, chances are that my wild guess of how deep I needed to go with my hole would then get eaten away and it just caused issues. It's not that big a deal to safely cut something with a very, very sharp end mill at the end of the day. But like I said, normally I put it in the blade. This time it's going in the handle. So we're going to talk a little bit more about finishing now, because this is where I start to apply my finishes. I have a bunch of stuff here. I will zoom out. These are examples of good finishes and bad finishes. So let's go over the bad ones first. These three will work, and there's a whole bunch of other options. These are just the ones that I had in my shop. These are great finishes, but not necessarily for a knife. So here's why. Number one, well, just the cheap, clear lacquer finish from any hardware store. Stuff's awesome for boxes or a cheap table that you're refinishing in your backyard. This stuff is totally cool. It dries really fast. And lacquer is definitely my preferred finish for any kind of furniture product. So why not on the knife? Well, this is what we call a surface finish. It's going to get sprayed on or brushed, whatever, and then it's going to dry in a film. And then what's going to happen on the first coat is it's going to seep into the wood, so you're going to have holes. And then you're going to have to go back in and put another coat on, and another coat, and another coat. Eventually what you're going to do is build up these layers of film that's going to give you that really nice, deep, glossy, plastic-looking finish, which can or cannot be an ideal thing, but on a knife that's going to get used, surface finishes will chip, and then if it chips, it's going to start to peel, and there's going to be cracks, and it's going to look awful. It's just imagine like an old antique piece of furniture where all those little yellowy bits are starting to come off. We don't want that. So another option would be oil. Oil finishes are definitely super awesome for this kind of thing. The reason is it's ridiculously easy to apply. You wipe it on a rag, or you pour some on a rag, you wipe it on, wait a minute or two, let it get kind of sticky, wipe it off, and then you're done. You can do that as much or as little as you want. Now the problem with these two oil finishes is these are non-polymerizing oil finishes. You may note that the linseed oil is sticky, all this extra stuff up here, which is what you want. You want your oil to dry into something hard like this. Now, I might have bit my tongue by saying this is a non-polymerizing oil, but boiled linseed oil or even just regular linseed oil takes forever to dry. This is what oil painters use. This is why 16th century Renaissance paintings are still wet. It works really well and it will give you an amazingly deep finish, but it's going to be sticky here and there for who knows how long. It's going to seep out with temperature changes. So while it works, and if you got 10 years to let your finishes dry, then sure, go ahead, use boiled linseed oil. But other than that, it's going to give you a lot of problems. Teak oil is, from what I understand, oil from resinous woods mixed with some chemicals and thinners and whatnot. Now, all of these are toxic finishes. All finishes are toxic, even this butcher block finish, which we're going to get into. The reason why it's toxic is because it's full of solvents. So the actual thing in there, the oil, what is lacquer? Let's say varnish. So anything that comes from a natural source, like varnish and all these other things, come from natural things. It's either a seed, a nut, an insect. A lot of stuff just comes from like excretions. So what you have to do is thin that out with a solvent so that you can apply it to something, and then when the solvent evaporates, it leaves the finish in place. Now once that's happened, it's not toxic anymore. A lot of this stuff is natural, but it's drenched in chemicals and all sorts of astringent things that'll kill you. So they put really harsh chemical warning labels and all sorts of stuff on these so they don't get sued. But just so you know, that's what solvents are. So teak oil is a natural oil, and what that's going to do is it'll go into there, but it'll never dry. You'll just have to reapply it. It's going to unnoticeably just wear off on your hands and your clothes, and it's not going to stain and leave a mess or anything. It's great again for furniture, but for something you're going to be touching all the time, you're going to transfer your oils in and pull those out, and that's just not what we're looking for. So move these off to the side. Now this and this are also surface finishes, but what we can do with them is apply them in a way that they will soak into whatever little bit of pores is left in this stabilized wood. Nothing's going to soak into the true stone. But you wipe these on, give it a second or two, just until it starts to get a little sticky, and then you wipe it off. And what you did was you've removed all of the surface layers, and you've only let the tiny bits that soaked into the wood remain. And then again, we're going to reapply. Eventually you'll get all the little pores filled in, and you're just filling your gaps now. Like, imagine this foam pad. If we were going to just kind of put some stuff in here and then wipe it off, you'd get a lot of these, but some of them would still be left. So we're just going to do that until it's smooth, and then not build our layer up. This butcher block stuff, if you go on Amazon and read the reviews, it gets bad reviews because people don't know how to use it. This stuff is awesome. It's an oil-based varnish, and it's going to soak in, and then we're going to wipe it off. So if you're doing a butcher block or a cutting board or something, again, that film finish is going to be awful because you cut it with the knife. You're going to cut your finish. So if you're cutting your finish, you're forcing food gunk and bacteria into your cutting board, and that's why wooden cutting boards get a bad rap. They're actually the best ones you can use, especially on your knife. So if you're doing a pore filling finish, you're actually filling all the pores that are going to accumulate gunk in them. So this stuff is really cool, but you got to know how to apply it. And it's super easy. You wipe it on, wipe it off, and then sand it. Maybe do that a couple times until you could see the finish. So I am missing the most important of the finishes, and I just realized that it got left behind at the other shop when we moved. I'm missing two things now. I'm missing my Dremel, and I'm missing my Tung Oil. So Tung Oil is by far my favorite of the finishes. You can thin it, you can apply it full strength. It's nice and thick, almost like a hot honey to a degree if you can get a really good brand of it. Tung Oil is by far my favorite. The best part about oil finishes is that as a customer or as a knife owner, you can do that pretty easily. If your knife gets scuffed up or you've just had it for years and years and the finish is kind of worn off and it's dull and it's not what it used to be, go to Pep Boys. Get a sheet of wet dry 1200 grit plus sandpaper, rub this, hell, even some steel wool or a Scotch-Brite pad or a scrubby from your kitchen, that'll get that back up, and then you just wipe some tung oil on and it's back to being brand new again. So these kinds of finishes are really cool in the fact that they're easy for you to apply and they're easy for me to apply too. I do like the wipe on poly. I feel like it is right down the middle of the road between the oily varnish soak in kind of finishes and the film finishes. This stuff wipes on really thin. It's nice and liquidy in there. So just a couple minutes here and there and a wipe off. I feel like for the times that I can't get a $40 jug of tung oil or this stuff, if you can't find it, everybody got wipe on poly. This stuff works pretty well, but I'd say it's my last choice for things that I'm going to use only because it's polyurethane and psh, this is a professional operation over here. So I will also say that the manufacturers of the stabilizing resin, I use Cactus Juice, he says that you don't need to apply any kind of finishes. And that's true. You could just buff this. The resin does act as its own finish, but I feel like a little bit of something here and there helps, and it really makes the luminescence and the iridescence of the wood really pop out. Especially if you're doing pictures, always wax your stuff when you're doing pictures. It just makes everything look that much better. So I guess really the next step here, everything's looking really good. I guess we're gonna edge this blade. I don't put my maker's mark in until everything's finished and has an edge on it because it ain't built sharp unless it is sharp.